With my infrequent upload schedule, my cousin has challenged me to make a video in 24 hours. So this is the beginning of my series creating my own domain expansions in Blender 3D. My inspiration came from this video where a commenter writes a short description of an artwork that could resemble a domain expansion.
Existence beyond the great Big Bang. Domain expansion. Yin and Yang.
So I went to one of my favorite sites for 3D models, My Mini Factory. After scrolling for a few seconds, I came across this model of a mourner. The description says that this is a mourner weeping above the tomb of an important nobleman. Instantly, I imported this model into Blender, and my mind raced to the idea that this would be a saint in the afterlife. Within the first few minutes of creating this blend file, I already thought of potential titles for this artwork, such as Punishment of the Saints, Judgments of the Saints, and even Council of the Holy. I wanted this artwork to depict a world beyond the earthly realm, a transitionary phase akin to purgatory, where the righteous saint will screen you before you are allowed to continue on your journey. So in Blender, I duplicate the model and scale it down slightly. This smaller model would be mirrored on the other side, creating a small council of saints. There's really not much to this scene, as it's heavily reliant on lighting. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to convey a mysterious and solemn environment, which is achieved through dim lighting, harsh shadows, and high contrast. First, I add area lights above each of the models, pointing the light directly down on the hoods. This would accentuate the hood's shadow, further obscuring the face of the saint. Next, volumetrics. Now I use Blender on a laptop, so I had to go light with the volumetrics. I wanted the fog to sit at the feet of the saints, so I added a cube, changed the viewport visibility settings to bounds. I also scaled up the cube to fit the scene appropriately. Then removed the principal BSDF shader in favor of a volume scatter node with the density set to 0.3. This is exactly the effect I was looking for, and it didn't take up too much computational power. So at this point I had added the models, the area lights, the HDRI, and the fog. But it didn't feel right. It had no subject. The whole purpose of a domain expansion is to have a targeted opponent. So I scoured some websites for rigged 3D models, but I couldn't find anything for free. That is until I remembered the wonderful website Mixamo. There are thousands of free 3D assets to use, so after a few minutes of looking, I came across this knight, which perfectly coheres with the type of story I'm trying to tell in this piece. So I place him in the scene and adjusted the camera so that it truly looks like some form of a council hearing. To sell this effect, there were two things that I wanted to get right. First was the sense of scale. I wanted these spiritual figures to dwarf the knight in the scene. Part of this can be solved by making the saints much bigger. However, the distance between the camera and the knight was something that I played around with several times, even changing the focal length as well. And second of all, the angle of the image. So the saints must be looking down on our subject. So this means that we want our camera to be pointing upwards towards our saints. And we also want to make sure that we have everything fitting in the scene the way that we want. Once I was happy with the setup, I add a plane for the floor. And the last thing that I added before I moved on to creating the materials were the halos. As I mentioned, these figures were saints, noble figures who have been given a duty in the afterlife. So it just seemed fitting to add a halo. Materials were very simple. I used this stone texture from BlendKit for the statues. Next, for the ground, I wanted it to be some type of shallow heavenly waters. So to do this, I brought down the roughness of the principled BSDF, increased the metallic ever so slightly, and using a wave texture and a bump node, I was able to fake some semi-realistic ripples on the surface. So that was it for the materials. I rendered the halos on a separate layer from the rest of the scene so that I can manipulate the different elements independently. With that all done, I hit render and this is what I got. But the best work always comes through after compositing. This was my final node setup, but let's go through each of the different elements. These nodes were used to denoise the image and to tweak the colors. There were very subtle differences using these nodes, as I was quite happy with how it already looked. However, this is the difference with and without them. Next was the glare and the lens distortion nodes. Glare was to add that extra shine in certain places, and the lens distortion was for chromatic aberration. Turning up the lens distortion always gives that more stylized look, however you don't want to go overboard with it. To keep the transparency of this layer, a second lens distortion node is used with a set alpha node. Then, to end this branch, I use a filter node. I love the different effects that each filter provides, but I usually settle on Sobel with a factor of 0.48. So this region here is for the halos. I gave them 2 glare nodes so that I could have that extra shine, followed by another Sobel node, and then this was mixed with a simple alpha over node. And finally, we need a background. So I found this image online, played with the colors using these nodes, and combined it with the previous 2 branches to get the final render, Domain Expansion, Saints Judgment. Let me know if you'd like to see more, and to see some of my other projects, check out my Instagram page. I do a lot of things there that you don't see here. Anyway, thanks for watching.